This is the Philanthropy Show, connecting and inspiring philanthropy.
Welcome to the Philanthropy Show. I'm your host, Luann Saraga Walters. I want to start off today's show by reading you a very interesting poem, The Advocate's Credo. Thou art my child, my parent, my elder. I love thee best, but could not love thee half as much, loved I not all the rest. That is on the signature of our very special guest today, and our show's topic is on the 4 generations, so it's fitting that we have Jack Levine with the 4 Generations Institute here to talk to us about some really amazing work that you're doing throughout the state of Florida and beyond. I know you've traveled, so thank you for coming and meeting with us.
My pleasure, Luann.
We are on location at the Children's Board of Hillsborough County, where I know you had a lot of meetings today, so really appreciate you taking some time. This is kind of outside of our normally scripted and scheduled philanthropy show shoot, but just taking advantage of having you here.
Thank you.
So let's talk first about this. I love this credo and that you have this in your signature block. And when I got your email, I went, wow, that is really neat. This kind of speaks to the heart of what you're doing.
Well, my feeling about advocacy, the voice of advocacy, is that we should not differentiate by age group, and we should not differentiate between our own families, what our own families need, and what the community's families need. So I picked that up decades ago. It was a variation on a theme, never copyrighted, never really published. So I kind of crafted it for my own English literature background, rhyming, and it's worked well for me. It's really the closer of most of my presentations.
Well, I love it.
With held hands, of course.
Oh, well, that's nice, yes. So tell me about 4 Generations Institute and how this started for you.
It started at birth. My father was 60 when I was born.
Wow.
And he was the oldest dad on the block. He was older than all my friends' grandfathers. And by the way, when I was born in 1951, 60 was kind of old.
Yes.
I'm giving testimony today that it is no longer old because we've added another generation.
No, I heard somebody say 60 is the new 40.
Yeah, well, I kind of consider 60 is the springboard to the next 20, 40, 60 years. I don't know how long we all will live, but in reality, it's kind of midlife when you look at the health indicators. So when I was a baby, there was this old dad, and he had already turned blind.
Wow.
So my father was the oldest and blindest guy that we knew. And he brought people to our kitchen table because he couldn't drive. That would have been unsafe. So they came to him, and this was suburban New York. My hometown is Long Beach, New York. Okay. And I grew up listening to the passionate articulation of perspectives, causes, at my kitchen table.
Wow.
So, you know, they say when kids kind of get acclimated to something, good and bad, they kind of follow that path. So I was really my father's son, and his buddies, the passion, the interest in whatever causes, I didn't understand what they were saying, but I picked up on the passion. So
they were advocates of their own right.
Advocates of their own right. They were business owners who did good things for their own workers. They were activists in terms of their own immigration experience. Almost all of them were immigrant Jews. A couple of them were Holocaust survivors, but most of them had come over like my father in the first wave, we called it, which was before World War I. And, you know, I hearken back to thinking and reading for my father, because again, when you're a blind man and you have interests, you have to have a reader. Wow. And that was my official designation probably from age 7 or 8. So I feel I was nurtured into the advocacy role, and it's been almost 40 years in Florida that I've advocated for children, and now for the multiple generations. It's a calling.
That's wonderful. And you know, you and I were talking about this show about the 4 generations, because I think sometimes people tend to look at it as 3 generations, infant to whatever age, middle age, and then elderly. But you have 4 generations within your...
Yeah, we've gone through an amazing demographic shift in this nation in this past 35 years. When I was growing up in the 1950s, there were children, parents, and grandparents. Our grandparents were pretty much the oldest people we knew, except, of course, for my father. Now we are children, parents, grandparents, and super elders. And
living longer.
The demographic shift has been to recognize that there are 50-year-olds who have grandparents. if you do the math.
That's amazing.
And that we weren't prepared for that. Nobody said we'd be in our 50s or even 60s parenting our parents. It's kind of an opposite reality. Now, what that means is the challenges have to be met with opportunities. You know, that's what the Chinese say. That's what the crisis is challenge plus opportunity.
The word itself.
The word itself,
yes.
yes, it's the calligraphy. And what I feel deeply is that we have to be smart and sensitive at the same time. We have to know that there are realities that families are facing at the kitchen table, and they need to be discussed at the conference table. They need to come into the halls of the Capitol. They need to come into the business community. They need to come into philanthropy.
You know, Jack, you say that because that's a really good point. We have tended to, in my years of growing up, you separate, you know, and we're seeing more of that even within schools, trying to nurture the whole child, in the holistic approach to seeing the child, but also the worker, right? The middle-aged or the older worker who has the differences of demographics within their own, and how do they handle these challenges as a family? So what do you do with Four Generations Institute and how you're advocating right now? What do you...
Well, I do this, which
Yes.
is speak about the realities and the opportunities for bridging the generations. I provide strategic planning for entities like service agencies that may work with one age group, and I ask a question, how are you bringing the generations in? So the early childhood development folks, the early childhood teachers, where are the 50 and 60-year-olds reading to these children?
Wow.
I ask the hospice people, where are your teenage volunteers?
Oh, this is
Because, see,
wonderful.
it's a two-way bridge. All good bridges go both directions. So while my career has mostly been focused on the under 18-year-olds, the children of our communities, I started hearing the voices of my father, my grandmother, what about your knowledge of us? And that's kind of where the science and the strategy has developed. The other thing, as briefly as I can say it, is we're all in the legacy business. I mean, our cards may say something else, our parking places may be in different places, but a lot has to do with about what will we be remembered. And that's both in our families and in our communities. So I try to motivate, inspire, give folks the tools that they need to build a better future, because at some point they're going to say, well, what was that person's contribution? And we're building that.
And I love, and I want to hark on this word, the bridge, the bridging, because there is necessary work to be done. We're going to take a quick break, but I want to, when we come back, to talk about how to pull together these segments of society which have really kind of been segregated from each other, separated from each other. So we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with the Philanthropy Show.
Follow the Philanthropy Show on Facebook for behind-the-scenes action, polls, and commentary. This show sponsored in part by
My Paper Pusher. Consider it done.
We've taken the show on the road, and we would like to thank our studio sponsor, the Nonprofit Leadership Center of Tampa Bay, which really makes all of the shows that we shoot in Tampa Bay possible. Thank you so much. You know, on the road, we are learning such amazing and incredible things about all of the amazing work that's being done in the nonprofit communities throughout the state of Florida and beyond, and we would love to come to you. We have sponsorship opportunities available, which would help us produce 4 shows about your nonprofit community, really essential, that would help educate, uplift, and empower other nonprofit staff, board members, and donors. So contact us today, and we could be driving the Philanthropy Show into your community tomorrow.
I'm a guardian ad litem, so I sometimes see 5 generations. I see great-grandmothers taking care of little ones. In fact, if you ask a child why they did well and not another child, they'll always point to one, a principal or a teacher or a youth counselor or somebody like that.
Everything we do in life is all about families, connecting families to the services they need, bridging the generational gap, making them very aware of the services available to them. So it's really, really important that we know where our families are, that we know how to encourage our families to be the best they can be, to tap through the resources they have.
Welcome back to the Philanthropy Show. Today we are talking about 4 generations and what this looks like within our society, our homes, our businesses, our nonprofits, our cultural infrastructure. And before the break, Jack, we were talking about how one of your key points is that you want to bridge this gap between them, which leads to the observation that our age demographics have been separated, segregated into these little age blocks. You think of a voter registration card or anything that you're filling out and it says, what's your age range? Are you the 40 to 45-year-old woman? Are you So how did we get to this point in society that we have so separated ourselves and distanced ourselves from each other?
First, let's go back 375 years to 1640 when John Donne, a British poet, D-O-N-N-E, wrote a line that is so enduring, we know it today. No man is an island.
Mm-hmm.
That's not just a description or a literary reference. It is the human condition. We're not supposed to be separated. We're supposed to be connected to the continent, in his words, but we're really supposed to be connected to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you examples. The newborn baby. It's one of the most vulnerable of all species. That cry that gets louder and louder, hold me, touch me, feed me. It becomes an alarm. Well, that means there's a dependency there.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interdependency. What about the last stages of life? Sometimes it's completely unexpected on the battlefield or on the highway. But most deaths are actually more natural and more predictable. Isn't it better to have a connection as you're passing into however you believe your next life to be?
Mm-hmm.
So segregation is unnatural. Mm-hmm. It's unnatural, I think, in the family and certainly in the community. Now, we've gone the other way with how we have grown our communities. We have segregated by age.
Mm-hmm.
Those billboards, come 55 over, don't worry about anything else, it's a life of leisure. Well,
And our advertising.
And our advertising.
It's targeting definite demographics and
Absolutely.
interests.
Florida is particularly an offender about this, unfortunately. So this is the best place for the laboratory for generational bridging, because I think there are a lot of people who were segregated who don't want to be segregated.
Mm-hmm.
They were sold something that is not quite what they had in mind, because while they may not want to be around a lot of kids, they don't want to be around no children.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with our mobility and demography switches, a lot of our families are not next door or down the block
Mm-hmm.
from each other. The idea here is a strategy to build a true intergenerational powerful voice so that our policy leaders and our business leaders and our philanthropy leaders see and hear the message that we don't want to be separate. We want to be connected. And then there are good ways of doing it, smart ways of doing it, and actually very economically sound ways of doing it, and that's what I advocate.
I think of collaboration is a big word in the nonprofit world right now, but I think of different ways that we are trying to collaborate between our nonprofits. But when you think of this bridging the gap of the ages, and if we took a little bit of time to think about what does that look like, really, I'm thinking of a video that has just migrated throughout Facebook virally as it does, and there's a nursing home and with a nursery right next door,
Yes.
so that
Very
the kids
special.
can come in, and the bond that goes between the
Yes.
two generations, those two distinct generations. But it is nurturing, it is feeding both of those
Yes.
generations in some way.
And there's a mutuality of need. That's what's beautiful about relationships. If they're done right, everyone wins.
Mm-hmm.
And as we build that emotional tie, or sometimes rebuild that emotional tie, then everyone feels it and they know it's the right place to be. I'm very interested in philanthropy because as an English literature guy, I always look for the origin of the word. It means in the Greek the love of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a nice way to show that love is a $50,000 check. I agree there's some money involved sometimes. But I'm advocating a new kind of philanthropy. It used to be called volunteerism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't use the term in public anymore. I said it and I won't say it again. I call it time philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
And the value of that, if you add that to the generational bridging concept, is really where we want to be. We want to give of our life's experience
Mm-hmm.
in both directions, because our young people have a lot to teach us. as we age, and our elders have a lot to teach young people as they grow. So, I mean, I see it clearly. You know, my father was blind, but I have very good vision. And I see it clearly, and it's a question of where does it take root and how does it grow?
Well, and I think that also that begs the question, what happens if we don't address this? Where are we heading?
Well, the cost of not doing the right thing is very expensive. It's expensive emotionally and economically. We know prevention works, and prevention does not stop at age 5. It does also go to the 90s. If we keep people home safe, where they want to be around their settings rather than move them to an unfamiliar place, a congregate living place, that's a definition of prevention. So the cost of not doing the right thing, keeping bad things from happening, is much, much too expensive. I mean, it's true in all kinds of examples of research, leveraging research.
And I think about how can we do that then in the nonprofit community? How can we actually bridge the gap within our own organizations and looking at our programs and our missions? And I like what you were talking about with philanthropy, because that's you're speaking our language.
Good.
But how can we do that? What are some ideas? Like we just talked about, the nursing home and the nursery school,
Sure.
and we think of teens who can come and sit with older folks and helping them learn how to do computers and
Sure.
whatnot. But there have to be a myriad of ways
Sure.
that if we think about it, we can get all these generations working together, even as volunteers.
As
or
what?
As volunteers.
As what?
Volunteer.
Time philanthropists.
Time philanthropists.
Okay,
I
see
love
that?
this.
I'm an editor. I'm going to edit another phrase you used, Luann, because I don't like it.
Okay.
Not for profit.
Not for profit.
It's a negative word. I never go around saying I'm not Ralph and I'm not Jim. That sector,
Okay, I love this guy.
that sector should be called the community sector.
Oh, I like it.
Business people, and I know many, many business people, they don't understand the term not-for-profit because it sounds like it's so different from them. And you
Right.
know what else they believe? If it's a nonprofit, isn't everybody a volunteer? Doesn't the electric company give
And
you
you
free
shouldn't make any money,
energy?
no salary, no
Yes.
nothing, because of the.
So I'm trying
Yes, I
to
like that.
politely circle that word in red, move it aside, put it on the IRS form, put it in a locked cabinet, and use the term community sector.
Well, we're going to use that
elevates it.
term
I know.
through the rest of this show at least, and I'm going to try to incorporate that
And-
into my
and my ears
vocabulary,
are
Jack.
open.
I love it. I want to take another short break, and when we come back, I want to talk about some ideas, like we were just talking about. How can we move this forward, and what have you
Sure.
seen going on in other communities as you've been around the block in Florida? So we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
This show sponsored in part by
Our studio sponsor, the Nonprofit Leadership Center of Tampa Bay.
The Philanthropy Show is on demand every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at both thephilanthropyshow.com and YouTube/WatchMVVP-TV.
I was a juvenile judge for many years, and I saw so many kids who were lonely, who had no responsible adult in their lives. And to have an older one, they didn't care if it was a grandma, great-grandma, grandfather, whatever. They just needed someone. And then now that when I retired, I go to a lot of activities, and I see the other side. I see lonely older people who would love to talk to a teenager.
So it is a huge opportunity. It is a challenge as well, is how do we help the talent that's there from the young to the old to work with each other.
Welcome back to the Philanthropy Show, having a fascinating discussion about the community sector with Jack Levine and the age differentiations, if I can even say that word, and how we can really pull those together. So how do we, and Jack, what have you seen, since you travel throughout the country a lot through Florida, what are you seeing that gives you hope about new means and methods of connecting the age generations, the groups?
My hope is refreshed every day. I am the most optimistic person in the room. I try to explain that things can be done better than they are being done, but there are wonderful things already being done. So let me give an example. Florida in 1979, and I know because I was at the drafting table, adopted a concept we call guardian ad litem. Elsewhere they call it CASA, court-appointed special advocates. And these are volunteers, community voices and time philanthropists.
Yes, time philanthropists. I was going to say community investors.
Who give of their time
Okay.
to represent, through fact-finding in front of the judge, abused, neglected children who need services. I was there when we were wondering, actually worrying, whether we'd have 50 of these folks come forward. This year we have 10,000.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's a homegrown success story, not only Florida grown, but elsewhere, but Florida is particularly the best. Now, 2/3 of those guardians ad litem are over age 55. Now, when you think about it, it's a commitment, and the over age 55s who have an interest also have some extra time to give to this. So that's one of the badges of not only courage, but badges of community involvement that we like to show others. If they can do it, what about you?
Well, and I think too, what you're like boys and girls clubs or big brothers, big sisters, where you're putting
Sure.
different generations together for a mentoring session.
Well, mentoring has a lot of definitions. Relationship mentoring is very important. I'm concerned if mentoring is too episodic, because that sends a signal to children that there's not a permanence necessarily, but a long-term relationship. So I like to kind of judge whether there is really a bond there, like sometimes we have in the fostering arena when we have foster children. If the children go to 3 or 4 placements a year,
That's rough.
that is a negative rather than a positive
Absolutely.
relationship. So recruiting the right kinds of mentors, whether it be residential or in the community. Give you another example. It's one of my favorites. When we look at what teenagers are exposed to in the realm of death, and I know it's not a topic of light conversation, but it's mostly self-imposed suicidal, accidental auto or drug, or fake video games. So we are growing a generation who's never seen real death. And we separate the dying in hospice or in hospitals or in homes from the young people. Now, how are they supposed to learn about nature's life cycle unless they experience it?
Absolutely.
And in a way, that fake death reality makes them, I think, more prone to take risks.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because I think there is a sensitivity, and this goes back to what we were talking about in the last segment, that by moving each other apart and segregating, it's almost as if we're having to experience each age as we go through it, as opposed to having experienced it from our family members.
Yes.
Or at least from the next generation, we might see a little bit of that. I think of my own mother and being there when she died, and realizing this isn't actually as scary as I thought. It was actually kind of beautiful, not to lose her, but to experience it. But we have an interesting culture, because other cultures do encourage that kind of intergenerational communication or participation. Experience is what I'm thinking of.
And what sparks to mind, because I'm a cook, is our nutritional practices. I believe they're relevant. I mean, I come from the day when people took ingredients like vegetables and meats, put them in pots, stirred them with seasoning. Not only that, but served them in bowls, and we ate together. We actually talked over meals. I'm talking to young people now, and they're saying, man, you are old. We eat out of bags and boxes by ourselves in front of devices.
Wow.
Now, where does the entire culture go if our young people don't know the value of prepared foods, the nutritional value, but also the emotional value? And where are our community gardens? This is Florida. We need to have a community garden on every corner. There shouldn't be these empty plots and schoolyards and
So that's
child
another
care
way
centers.
that we can do the bridging of the gap, get some
Another
folks
way.
together.
And I'm not just talking about a few, I'm talking about as a standard practice. And when a little 5-year-old sees an eggplant growing, you know what they want? They want to touch it and eat it.
Oh, sure.
And by the way, it's actually a nutritious vegetable. So it works on every level.
Curious. Well, I would encourage everybody to really find out more about this. I love what you're doing. 4 Generations Institute, give me your website and we'll put it up.
Forgen.org.
For the number 4.
Yes, number 4, G-E-N.
For the number 4, G-E-N.
Right.
.org.
And jack@forgen.org. It's a very, very simple way to get to me. I do a once or twice a month email to my network, and folks respond very well to it, so it's free. And folks can just drop me a note, jack@forgen.org, and we're on.
Well, it's a fascinating conversation for it. I'm going to move us into our our trademark session, which is how we end every show, and that is, we kind of heard a little bit about it, but I love it. What is your heart's definition of philanthropy? Not the head, but the heart. What does it mean to you?
Well, it means legacy. It means that we have to realistically look that we all are all in a life cycle. And philanthropy to me means generosity. It means the gift of not only dollars but of time, and really the gift of ourselves on behalf of others. Children crave it, elders need it as well, and my life's mission is to make sure that we define generosity in all of its different dimensions and then carry on and act upon it.
Oh, I love that. Well, I love what you're doing. And when we heard about it, we thought, we've got to have this guy on the show. So I'm just so appreciative that you were able to take time during your visit. Thank you for being on.
Thank you. A pleasure to know you.
You too. And for all of you volunteers equals time philanthropists out there.
She's learning.
Thank you for what you're doing in our community sector. We're going to develop our own little book that we'll pass out, the new terminology for philanthropy. That does it for today's Philanthropy Show. Be sure to go to thephilanthropyshow.com and check out the past shows tab. And thank you again, Jack. We'll see you next Monday.
My pleasure.
Do you have an idea for the Philanthropy Show? Contact us via our website or email us at tps@myvideovoice.com.